What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected legends sits down for what's supposed to be a friendly interview, and the host decides to show contempt instead of respect? In just 36 seconds, Jennifer Hudson turned her own show into a disaster, crossing a line so bold that Denzel Washington had no choice but to stand up, take off his mic, and walk straight off her stage. The lights of the Jennifer Hudson Show shimmered across the stage as Denzel Washington walked out to a thunder of applause. The crowd rose to their feet, cheering like they were welcoming royalty. Jennifer stood at the edge of the stage, clapping, smiling big for the cameras. Her smile looked polished, but her stare was sharp, almost competitive. As Denzel took his seat, the studio lights softened and the applause faded into a low hum. Then Jennifer leaned forward with a playful grin that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Look at you," she said, voice sweet, but edged with something else. "Still collecting applause after all these years. Some things never change, huh?" The audience chuckled, unsure if it was a compliment or a dig. Denzel gave a small smile, his posture calm, unbothered. "Respect doesn't expire, Jennifer." His voice was low, steady, and carried the kind of weight that didn't need to be raised. Jennifer blinked, her smile freezing for half a second before she recovered with a tight laugh. "Of course, it doesn't," she said, looking toward the crowd as if to invite them to laugh with her. But the laughter came softer, slower, uncertain. Denzel sat back in his chair, his eyes fixed on her with that signature calm. Jennifer picked up her note cards, flipping through them a little too fast. "So," she began again, pretending to sound casual, "you've been doing this a long time. How many years has it been now?" Denzel leaned slightly forward, smiling with the kind of patience that feels both kind and dangerous. "Long enough to know better than to count," he said. The audience laughed politely, but Jennifer pressed on, sensing an opening she shouldn't have taken. "Right," she said, her tone playful on the surface but cutting underneath. "It must be nice to have that kind of career, always being the legend in the room." Denzel didn't flinch. He simply replied, "It's only nice when the room knows what that means." The studio fell silent for a moment. Jennifer's smile faltered again, and she shifted in her chair, trying to regain control of the stage. Denzel wasn't raising his voice, but his calm made her nervous. Jennifer laughed softly, like she could smooth it all over. "Well," she said, crossing her legs and looking him up and down, "you certainly know how to make an entrance." Denzel nodded slightly, his voice calm but loaded with intent. "I don't make entrances, Jennifer. I show up." The crowd let out a collective breath. Some clapped, others just stared. Jennifer picked up the cue cards from her lap, flipping through them as if she needed a moment to gather her thoughts. But she wasn't reading anything. She looked up with that polished talk show smile, the kind that hides judgment behind charm, and said, "So, you've been in this industry since before I even got my first paycheck, right?" The audience laughed, not sure if it was meant to be funny. Denzel smiled politely, leaning forward just enough to keep things civil. "Long enough to see the world change," he said evenly, "and sometimes not change enough." His tone was calm, but there was weight in it, a reminder that he'd seen more than she could imagine. Jennifer let out a light chuckle, tilting her head as if she were teasing an old friend. "And yet you're still here," she said, her voice dripping with that kind of sweet sarcasm daytime TV hosts get away with. "Guess you really don't know when to stop." The sound in the studio shifted. The laughter faded into a murmur, replaced by that uneasy tension everyone recognizes, but tries to ignore. A few audience members exchanged glances. Someone in the back even whispered, "Whoa." Denzel's smile disappeared. He didn't flinch, didn't blink, just looked straight at her, steady, unamused, completely in control. The silence dragged long enough for Jennifer to realize she'd gone too far, but by then, it was too late. Denzel's voice cut through the air, calm and deliberate. "Stopping isn't the same as quitting, Jennifer," he said. "Some of us just keep doing the work." It wasn't loud, but it hit harder than if he'd shouted. Jennifer forced a laugh, trying to play it off, but everyone could tell she'd just been checked. On her own stage, in front of her own audience. Denzel leaned back in his chair, expression unreadable. Jennifer shuffled her cue cards again, pretending to move on, but her eyes gave her away. She looked shaken, unsure how to steer the moment back. The audience stayed quiet, waiting to see what would happen next. Jennifer leaned forward now, elbows resting on her knees, her tone suddenly sharper, but wrapped in a laugh. "But come on, Denzel," she said, eyes narrowing just a little. "Don't you ever feel like you've done enough? Like maybe it's time to give the younger crowd their moment?" The words hung in the air, half joke, half jab. The audience gave a few nervous laughs, unsure whether to cheer or cringe. Denzel didn't move right away. He sat still, his expression calm, but his eyes sharper than before. "You think talent is limited to one generation?" he asked quietly, his voice cutting through the awkward laughter like a knife. Jennifer gave a tiny shrug, pretending to be innocent. "No," she said, feigning lightness. "I just think some people don't know how to pass the torch." She leaned back, smiling as if she'd just delivered a clever punchline. But it didn't land. Denzel's gaze didn't soften. If anything, it hardened. He took a slow breath and replied, "Passing the torch is one thing. Being told to burn out is another." The crowd reacted instantly, half gasp, half cheer. A few voices shouted, "Ooh!" while others clapped without even realizing it. Jennifer's smile twitched. She laughed, but it sounded forced, like she was laughing to prove she wasn't bothered. "Oh, come on, don't get all serious on me," she said, waving a hand. Denzel didn't answer. He just gave her that quiet, unreadable look, the kind of look that says more than words ever could. The audience could feel it too. That balance of power had shifted. Jennifer was supposed to be in control of the interview, but now it was Denzel's presence, his silence, that owned the room. The atmosphere is very tense now. The cameras caught the flicker of unease in Jennifer's smile before she forced herself to move to the next question. Jennifer wasn't backing down. She crossed one leg over the other, flashed a quick grin, and went in again, half joking, half daring. "I mean, you've played every role under the sun," she said, ticking them off on her fingers. "Hero, cop, preacher, even the wise mentor. What's next? Playing yourself?" Her tone was light, but there was an edge to it, the kind that cuts before the other person realizes they've been insulted. A few people in the crowd chuckled awkwardly, unsure if it was safe to laugh. Denzel didn't even blink. He tilted his head slightly, a calm smile returning to his face. "That's what I've been doing since day one," he said evenly. "And that's why I'm still here." His voice wasn't loud, but it landed heavy. The audience murmured again, this time with more interest than laughter. Jennifer raised her eyebrows, forcing a laugh. "Confidence or arrogance, Mr. Washington?" she asked, pretending it was a light-hearted tease, but her tone betrayed her. Denzel leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, his eyes locking on hers. The warmth in his voice was gone. "Confidence," he said slowly, "is knowing who you are. Arrogance is forgetting who got you there." For a moment, you could hear the air conditioner hum over the audience. Then came a low whistle from somewhere in the crowd, followed by a few nervous ohs. Jennifer's laugh cracked. She reached up and adjusted her microphone like she was buying herself a second to breathe. "Well?" she said, forcing a smile. We like a man who knows his place. Denzel didn't respond. He just leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable, the silence pressing heavier with every second. Jennifer tried to shift gears, pretending to move the conversation to something deeper, but her tone said otherwise. She leaned back in her chair, twirling her pen, eyes locked on Denzel like she was setting a trap. "You talk a lot about legacy," she began, voice smooth but sharp underneath. "But isn't legacy just another word for control? Keeping your name alive while the rest of the world struggles to be heard?" The question hung in the air, and even the audience seemed unsure how to react. Some laughed softly, others went silent. Denzel didn't move. He just looked at her, expression calm, but his eyes burning with that quiet authority that made people sit up straighter. "Legacy," he said slowly, "is what's left after control. You should know that, Jennifer. You've built yours on high notes, not hard lessons." His voice was steady, not cruel, but every word landed like a quiet punch. The room tightened. Jennifer's smile froze for half a second before she forced it back, her hands fidgeting with her cue cards. "Oh," she said, trying to laugh. "So now you're judging singers too?" Her tone was playful on the surface, but there was a crack in it, a tremor she couldn't quite hide. Denzel leaned back in his chair, voice dropping to a lower, colder register. "No," he said, staring straight at her. "Just people who mistake fame for wisdom." That line hit like a hammer. Somewhere in the audience, a single voice whispered, "Damn." Others gasped or shifted in their seats, as if unsure whether to clap or hide. Jennifer's face changed, the smile gone, replaced by a blank look that couldn't quite mask the sting. She glanced at the crowd for help, but no one said a word. When she turned back to Denzel, her eyes had lost their shine. She looked like she wasn't sure who was really in control of her own show. Jennifer's tone sharpened, her smile gone now. "You really don't think it's selfish," she said, each word landing like a jab, "to keep taking roles when younger actors can't even get auditions?" The crowd went still. It wasn't a question anymore. It was an accusation. Denzel didn't move, didn't even blink. "You really don't think it's arrogant," he replied, his voice calm but cutting, "to assume you decide who deserves opportunity?" Jennifer gave a small, mocking laugh, tilting her head like she just caught him in something. "Oh, please," she said, rolling her eyes. "Don't play the humble card now. You're Hollywood royalty. You don't even audition anymore." The words hit with a sneer, and for a brief second you could almost feel the air tighten. Denzel leaned slightly forward, his voice dropping into that quiet, heavy tone that always demands attention. "Royalty earns its crown, Jennifer," he said. "Some people just buy a stage and call it a throne." The reaction from the audience was instant. Gasps, murmurs, even a few claps breaking through the tension. Someone in the front row whispered, "Oh, he did not just say that." Jennifer's face flushed. She tried to smile, but it looked strained, forced. She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms, pretending to relax, but her jaw was tight. The power dynamic had shifted completely. What started as her show was now his stage. Every eye in the room was on Denzel, and every camera caught the fire flickering behind her carefully composed expression. She wasn't used to being the one under the spotlight for the wrong reason, and she knew it. Jennifer leaned forward again, her tone sharp now, her patience clearly gone. "You think just because you've been around longer, you've got all the answers?" she snapped, her voice echoing just enough to make the audience shift uncomfortably in their seats. Denzel didn't react right away. He looked at her, calm, steady, unreadable. Then, almost like he was teaching a lesson, he said, "No. But I've learned when to keep my mouth shut. Maybe you'll get there someday." His words were quiet, but they carried the weight of a lifetime, and it landed like a slap. Jennifer laughed under her breath, a sharp little sound that wasn't really laughter at all. "I'm not afraid to speak my mind," she shot back, trying to sound in control, but her voice trembled slightly on the last word. Denzel leaned forward, his tone dropping lower, his gaze cutting straight through her. "Speaking your mind," he said, his voice cold as steel, "doesn't mean you're saying something worth hearing." That line hung in the air. Nobody dared to move. The audience fell completely silent, eyes darting between the two of them like they were watching a car crash in slow motion. Jennifer's smile collapsed. Her face tightened, her breathing shallow. For a split second, she looked lost, like she realized the ground beneath her had shifted. She glanced toward the audience, but no one came to her rescue. The control she'd held since the start was gone, and Denzel hadn't raised his voice once. He just sat there, still and composed, while her confidence visibly cracked under the weight of her own words. Jennifer leaned back in her chair, her voice dropping lower, the sweetness gone. "You know what, Denzel?" she said, each word laced with irritation. "Maybe people just don't want to hear the same old speeches anymore." The audience gasped softly. Even they knew she'd just crossed a line she couldn't take back. Denzel didn't react right away. He sat there for a moment, eyes fixed on her, then slowly stood up. The movement was calm, deliberate, the kind that says everything without needing words. He reached for his microphone, unhooked it from his jacket, and placed it gently on the chair beside him. The studio was so quiet that the soft click of the mic hitting the cushion felt deafening. "Then they should invite someone worth listening to," he said simply. His voice was calm, not angry, not loud, just final. It was the kind of line that didn't need to be followed by anything else. Jennifer blinked, caught completely off guard. She let out a nervous laugh, trying to pull the moment back. "Wait, where are you going?" she said quickly, forcing a grin. "Come on, I was just teasing." Denzel turned halfway toward her, and when he looked back, his eyes were cold, sharp, and steady. "You weren't teasing," he said quietly. "You were testing. And you failed." That single sentence hit harder than any outburst could have. Jennifer froze, her mouth slightly open, but no words came out. Denzel didn't wait for a response. He straightened his jacket and walked off the stage without another look, every step echoing in the stunned silence. The cameras kept rolling, catching Jennifer still standing there, her cue cards trembling slightly in her hands. She forced a smile, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. The audience didn't clap. No one spoke. It was that strange kind of silence that happens when something real, something raw, has just unfolded live on television, and everyone knows they've just witnessed a moment that can't be undone. The studio sat in stunned silence. For a long, uneasy moment, no one knew whether to clap or stay quiet. A few people offered hesitant applause, soft, unsure, almost apologetic, while others just looked around, whispering under their breath. The energy that had filled the room at the start of the show was gone, replaced by something heavy and uncomfortable. Jennifer stood frozen under the bright lights, her cue cards still in her hand, her eyes darting toward the exit where Denzel had just walked out. She tried to smile, but her voice cracked as she looked down at the floor. "We'll be right back," she muttered, the words barely audible over the static of the microphones. The audience didn't respond. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate, unsure whether to cut or keep rolling. Somewhere backstage, a door shut quietly, and then, through the speakers, Denzel's voice came faintly from the mic he'd left behind, low, steady, echoing through the room like a final truth. "Respect isn't something you demand on your show," he said. "It's something you earn long before the lights turn on." The sound faded, leaving only the hum of silence and the weight of his words hanging in the air. Jennifer stood still, her expression hollow, the reality of what had just happened sinking in. The cameras finally cut to black, and the crowd knew they had just witnessed the kind of moment that daytime television would never forget. If you made it this far, you already know. Respect still matters, even in Hollywood. Denzel didn't raise his voice or lose his cool, but he proved a point that hit harder than any headline ever could. Moments like this remind us that dignity speaks louder than fame. If you want more stories that pull back the curtain on what really happens behind the cameras, make sure to subscribe, turn on the bell, and join the conversation in the comments below. What would you have done in Denzel's place?